Hello everyone. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of publications for Chronicles of Darkness, Dark Eras, for Changeling the Lost. So that's Changeling the Lost first edition. I'm not sure if this would be compatible with the second edition. Although I've got the second edition, I never really read it. I'm told that the pledges, etc., are very, very different, but I don't know if they're just different from a content perspective or if they're different from a mechanical perspective as well. Now, what are the Chronicle of Darkness, Dark Eras? Well, Dark Eras is really a huge tome. This clocks in at 591 pages, and it is really a book about the world of darkness through the ages. It starts off in the Neolithic world. It moves on to Iron Age. Here we've got the Vikings. We've got the three kingdoms of darkness. So obviously the Mandate of Heaven. So we're talking about what's today China. Here we come to the Byzantine, Constantinople, Istanbul area, the Angles. We have South America, Telpochcali. We've got the Saxon period, so the Angles and Saxons. We've got Fallen Blossoms, which is Japan. Here, Lily, Sabre and Thorn, that's Le Grand Siècle, that's the era of the Sun King, Louis the 14th. Louis the 14th. Then we've got Doubting Souls. Now that is the whole Salem witch trial thingy, 17th century. Then we've got a grim dark era, which is obviously the era of the Brothers Grimm's, 18th century Germany, the ruins of empire. So that's essentially the empires of Britain, of course, France, the colonies, the Ottoman Empire. In A Handful of Dust, we look at World War II. God's Own Country, of course, would be the United States. Into the Cold, Living the Post-War Dream. So, and The Bowery Dogs deals with the 1970s in the United States, like New York City, gangs, drugs, and so on and so forth. So essentially, this book is a companion for at least, it says here, one of each of the Chronicles of Darkness game lines. So we've got Mage the Awakening, Werewolf the Forsaken, which is the Sundered World, that's Neolithic, Mage the Awakening, Alexander the Great, Geist, the Sin Eaters or Changeling, the Lost Kingdoms of Darkness, which is of course China, Werewolf the Forsaken or Geist, the Wolf and the Raven, Viking expansion across Europe, Demon the Descent, After the Fall, so that's Ottoman conquest, shatters Constantinople, Skin Changers, Demon the Descent, Beneath the Skin, that would be the Aztec Empire, Vampire the Requiem, Changeling the Lost, Requiem for Regina, Elizabeth I, Hunter the Vigil, Fallen Blossoms, Japan in the Edo period, Changeling the Lost, Lily, Sabre and Thorn, so that's Louis the 14th. Hunter the Vigil, Doubting Souls, that's obviously immigrants and tribes struggle to coexist on the eastern seaboard in the ever-expanding colonies. Changeling the Lost, a grim dark era. Mummy the Curse, the ruins of empire, of course that's it says here, perhaps the quintessential era of the mummy in the mind of Westerners, the ruins of the empire, 1893 to 1924. Promethean, the created, a handful of dust, the Great Depression up until the 1940s, Geists and Eaters, 1950s. Demon, the descent into the cold, East Germany erects a wall against its Western counterpart, Cold War, and then Werewolf the Forsaken, the Bowery Dogs, crime, drugs, gang violence, vast economic disparity, and werewolves. So the idea is that this book will give you information about the relevant eras, and you can also get information about, for example, characters like Broadier the Wronged. He would have power 6, finesse 3, resistance 7. You know, and how would this work for your particular chronicle? And this, of course, is a really, really, really huge tome. Now, I also have these 3 much smaller volumes, Chronicles of Darkness, Dark Eras, 3 Kingdoms of Darkness, Lily, Saber and Thorn, and Dark Eras, A Grim Dark Era, which are essentially just the information that you need to play Changeling the Lost Chronicles in these eras. So here we've got the Qin era, the 3 Kingdoms, and the way the books work is they give you a really, I would say, they say, well, we're not a history book. But even if they're not a history book, they're doing a really good job of explaining the history. Now, I don't know that much about, obviously, or nothing at all, actually, should I say, about the Warring States, 3 Kingdoms of Darkness, 220 to 280 BC. But it actually explains this really, really nicely. It gives you information about the different kingdoms. And it also explains, so you've got the state of Wei, you've got the kingdom of Shu and the kingdom of Wu, and it explains how you can put in your court. So they've got directional courts, north, south, east, and west in China, and it explains how you can bring in your own chronicle. It also explains how you could bring in something that isn't Changeling the Lost. It gives you information about the vampires, about mages. It doesn't have, I don't think it has werewolves here in China, but I believe it would be possible. It gives you the different types of courts that they have. So, for example, the southern courts are the courts of the vermilion bird. It gives you mantles. It gives you descriptions of different contracts that your changelings can enter into, and it also gives you information about other things that you could play here. You could play Geist, the Sin Eaters, and so on and so forth, to ensure that you could use this whichever game you're playing. Then we've got Dark Eras, Lily, Saber and Thorn. This is termed a swashbuckling scenario, and it is true. It's all about honor. It's all about life in France around the era of King Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King. It also touches upon what happens in other areas of the world, both in Europe but also overseas, and it is a very interesting take on life in Europe at the time. And I have to say that from my recollection from school, it is actually the history that is given is pretty accurate, and it actually comes to life very well in these pages. It gives you the relevant information about the courts and the freeholds at the time, because obviously Changeling the Lost, as it is written in the core book, deals with modern day America. So basically that's where the freeholds are and where the courts are described. But of course, as times change, because obviously it's set in the 2000s, you have mobile phones and stuff. You didn't have mobile phones, you didn't have modern transport back then. So it also casts a light on what contracts would be a lot more appropriate or a lot more, or pledges that would be a lot more relevant back then than they are today. So anything to do with traveling quickly is very important. Anything to do with communication across vast distances is a lot more important, because they didn't have phones and there was no post. Lots of people were illiterate, so they couldn't write letters even if they'd wanted to. And the last one is Chronicles of Darkness, Dark Eras, a grim dark era, which is set, of course, which basically takes as its tenet that the stories that the Brothers Grimm wrote down are actually stories about either Arcadia and Durance, or about how changelings overcame the Fae. And it is becoming, it spreads across Germany, of course. It's also set against the backdrop of a lot of people at the time, because Germany wasn't a unified country at the time, so there was no one Germany, so there were different kingdoms and so on and so forth. But a lot of people considered this a uniting factor, a lot like in later years the what has now become the Finnish national epic, which was put together from different sources. This guy, he basically went around Finland and collected stories and songs from the Finnish peasants, and he formed them and forged them into a national epic. And that was still at the time when Finland wasn't a country of its own, but it was still occupied by Russia. And this was used as a focal point to come up with a Finnish, shall we say, identity, and say, well, yeah, we're not just peasants who happen to speak a different language than the language of the people who run the place, which is the Russians, but we are actually a country in our own right. We have our own language, we have our own culture, and we should have our own country. And this must not be underestimated, because linguists know, for example, that if somebody perceives, or if a group of people perceives that they have their own language, wanting a separate homeland is only a matter of time, especially if they feel that they are disenfranchised and underprivileged. And the same kind of holds true for what the Brothers Grimm did. A lot of people kind of had this almost, shall we say, romantic idea of what being German is, and they saw it reflected in these stories. And okay, the stories are quite grim, and no pun intended, and the actual sources are even grimmer. I mean, there is a lot of stuff around killing children, etc. There's a lot of stuff about, well, sometimes veiled, and in the present version that you would get in the bookshops today, very, very veiled. There is abuse, rape, etc. It's all in there. So at the time, the way they use the stories in the book is that these stories actually can be used. If you learn from them, you can try and avoid the Fae, because it gives you hints as to how not to get lost in the woods, as it were, how not to become lost. Or also, some of the courts actually view the stories as very dangerous, because they might incite the lost to go out and seek out their former keepers and challenge them, because you have like all these small kids that are heroes in the stories, and if you think that the kid is the lost and the bad old witch is the Fae, the kid overcomes the Fae, so let's go out there and smash Arcadia, go through the hedge, go into Arcadia, seek out the true Fae and just, smash them to pieces, or even maybe taunt them to bring them over, and that could endanger the whole freehold. So that's how this is structured. And I have to say that of all of these three books, this one is the one that I felt was most in keeping with the idea of Changeling the Lost. The other ones, I mean, especially the China one, I felt there the Changeling topic was quite pasted on, especially when you read the intro story, which deals with ghost hunters. So that would have been a lot more. I think I would have expected when I read the intro that this was going to be about Hunter, the vigil, you know, killing and finding ghosts, killing ghosts. But that's not what this is about. So there I thought that, you know, while of course you have 3 warring kingdoms, and of course there's a lot of intrigue, which of course resembles what happens in the courts of Changeling the Lost. Yeah, I can see it there. But for some reason, and this is probably also because maybe this whole China thing is of limited interest to me, I couldn't warm to the story. I couldn't warm to the era, and I just didn't feel that I take this and I'm kind of, okay, I want to play this. I want to play in this era. I want to play Changeling the Lost in this era. And the Lily, Saber and Thorn one is a lot better, in my opinion, from my point of view. So I really enjoyed reading it. Also because they have a really lovely storyline in there about the so-called Empress of the Empress of the North Star, who is a changeling who suddenly appears, and she basically sets up shop in I believe Rennes, and then she does things, and she's just there, and people have to come to terms with her. She's becoming more and more powerful. Some courts may resent this. The question is, what do you think? What does your court think? Does your court think about her at all, or do they ignore her completely? And then you have different possibilities of what you could do with her. So, and it's simply entitled, so who is she? Who is the Empress of the North Star? What is her ultimate goal? And there are different possibilities. I mean, you don't have to use any of these. You could come up with your own, but I think that they are all very intriguing. So the first one is that she's exactly what it says on the tin. She has an affluent, ambitious changeling. She is an affluent, ambitious changeling who has a knack, or maybe a goblin contract or two, for being in the right place at the right time, because she does come in with a little bit of an army. So if there are problems, she will take care of them. She also has money. Though her motives are not entirely altruistic, she truly does believe that a strong and united France is the best for every changeling. And of course, again, here you have this idea that the changelings are within France, and France is going through troubled times. But France, of course, also is a very united country, or that's what Louis XIV is trying to achieve. He even says, "L'État, c'est moi," I'm the state. It's not like I'm the head of state, but the state is me, you know. Or she could be one of them. The Empress is either one of the gentry in disguise or one of their agents. Her goal is to centralize and organize the lost, because she is trying to bring them to this place that she's in. And she is trying to forge alliances to bring them all to Brocéliande, which is, interestingly enough, it's a forest. And in Brocéliande is supposed to be the place where Merlin lives, or Merlin used to live. And so if she brings all of the lost in here, then the gentry just have to go to one place, and then they're all there, and they can all slaughter them or bring them back. Or it's personal. Perhaps her motivations are something more personal. Maybe she seeks to crush a particular rival or freehold that has wronged her in the past. So I could relate to this. I'm not. I mean, it does say, yeah, well, this is Alexandre Dumas, and it's like the Three Musketeers and so on. That's not really my kind of storyline, but I could relate to the story set in France. It kind of made sense to me. But the Dark Eras, A Grim Dark Era, was the best one in my opinion. Also, I like the artwork the best. This is really chilling artwork. I mean, this is just meh, and this is just plain annoying. I mean, that's, you know. So this one actually gave me the feeling of Dark Eras, of World of Darkness, the feeling of being lost, the feeling of imminent doom. And of course, I mean, it is also interesting how they explain what can and can't be done, because again, we're living in an illiterate world. We're living in a world where, for example, also they make it quite clear women changelings will have a problem because they can't just walk around like men can. So there has to be a way to account for this. So let's say that she is always accompanied by her husband, and so on and so forth. So this is something that has to be taken into account when you play in this era as well. And again, it gives you a brief piece of write-up on what other Chronicles of Darkness could you set in this era. So it also gives you like stuff that you would need from a mechanical perspective, like the Court of Art. So they have different courts, new trifles, new contracts, or different contracts, or the same contracts but with a lot more information. They also have new types of changelings, the Grims. These are pretty dull people who then become writers, and then the Companions of the Resigned. So these are changelings that befriend kids. The Order of the Story Heroes, and also, of course, information on playing the game. This was written pre the Changeling, the last second edition, so I can't really tell you if this is compatible. But if you play Changeling the Lost, and if you think about going back in time and playing in an era that isn't ours, I would say check out these. I'm not sure about this book because, first of all, it's huge. And I mean, it doesn't really lend itself to being read in the book, in bed, because it is very, very happy. Well, I'm losing my words today. It's not something you could read in bed because it's very, very heavy. But I think it could be quite interesting. And I'm also going to read it because I think that there might be stuff in there that I can reuse for even other stories. So, for example, when I play Call of Cthulhu, if there's something really troubling and mythical in here, I can actually take it and put it in. Or, for example, here this is now the Wolf and the Raven, 700 to 1100. I'm also running Call of Cthulhu Dark Ages, so there might be something in there that I can use. So I'm not sure if I would recommend this book because I haven't read it yet, but it's out there, and I got this a couple of weeks ago. So that's September or October 2020. So it's very, very recent that I bought this. And it's also one of those print-on-demand books, and I'm very happy with the quality again. The binding is good, and yeah, and it's a nice, sturdy book. And if you're into the Chronicles of Darkness, and if you want to play through the ages, this might be a very good source book for you. So talk to you soon. Bye-bye.